While loops. We start with counter control loops. So a counter control loop is a loop that will have a variable called the counter that counts how many times we repeat an action or more. So when we have a counter control loop, there are three things that need to happen to the counter, and we're going to see which ones they are. Number one, we need to declare and initialize the counter. Number two, we need to use the counter in the condition to compare to a stopping value to repeat the loop. And number three, inside the loop, before exiting, we need to modify the counter in the correct direction so eventually the counter causes the loop to stop. The first example that we're going to see is quite simple. And we're going to see these three parts in action. So in the declaration and initialization, we're going to declare an integer variable that you can name it anything you want. I named it count and initialize it to 0. It is very common in Java to start the counters at 0 because counter control loops are quite often used for arrays and for strings when you want to perform an action to each one of the characters or each one of the parts of an array. So here we have a while loop that is going to stop when the counter reaches the value 5, and we add 1 to the counter inside the loop. After the loop is executed, we're going to display only once, have a good day. So there is a declaration and initialization to 0. We compare the counter to the value 5. So it means that this is going to be a loop that executes 5 times. It's going to execute when the counter has the value 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That will be 5 times. What are we going to do? We're going to display on the screen I love Hawaii, and this is not shown in the output. This is just adding 1 to the counter, so the value of the counter changes each iteration of the loop. When this program executes, once that the ending bracket is reached, we go back to the condition with a new value of the counter. So when this program is built and executed, we're going to see that the sentence I love Hawaii is displayed on the screen 5 times. There you go. So if you count how many times that sentence was displayed, you see that it was displayed 5 times, even though we see it in the code just once. And the reason for that being displayed 5 times is because we started the counter at 0 and we finished the value of the counter at 5. To prove that, we can display the value of the counter to see how the value of the counter changes with each iteration of the loop. So there you see the counter goes from 0 to 4 each iteration of the loop. In this case, I simplify the program by just displaying the value of the counter so you can focus on that. So you have the counter that starts at 0, it increases by 1 at the end of the loop. So it displays the value 0, then it increases the value, and so on. We can also use this loop to repeat when you want output with special patterns. So if you need a row of fancy characters, rather than typing it yourself, you can have the computer repeat the pattern for you. So here we're going to have a pattern of pound sign, asterisk, pound sign, repeated 5 times. And with that, we make a decoration for our output, have a good day. So right now we have it only at the top. And we're going to see later on that we can also have the counter going downwards. So we can have another counter afterwards that starts with the ending value of the counter, which we know it's 5, because 5 is not less than 5, and that's when it stops. So this loop stops when the value of count reaches 5. So we can start with the value 5 and have the condition to repeat the loop while the value is greater than 0. So we can make the counter go downwards, and that way we don't have to start from scratch again. So while count is greater than 0, repeat this pattern below have a good day. And instead of increasing the value of the counter, because increasing it will cause an infinite loop, so we need to decrease the value by 1. And now you have the same pattern for a decoration to go on top of the sentence have a good day and below the sentence have a good day. And you run it and you check for spaces and funny things. We can also have the user choose how many times something is repeated. So rather than ending at a fixed value like 5, you would end the condition at the name of a variable. So that way, if the person chooses 3, it executes 3 times. If the person chooses 10, it repeats 10 times. So you can prompt the user for the value of a variable that is going to hold the stopping value. And then rather than compare the counter to the fixed value 5 or the fixed value 10, you can compare it to the name of a variable. And that means that that's going to be a change in value, because variable means that the value may vary. And we would use that when we want the user to choose how many times they want to repeat an action. So for example, you can ask, how many times do you want me to display something? Or you can ask, how many times, how many scores do you need to enter? Or how many grades did you get? So there we prompt the user for how many times to display the name of our state, and whatever they choose is the number of times is repeated. So remember to start the counter at 0, and remember to use the condition less than the variable where you're storing the value. We can also use loops to generate random anything. In this example, we have a program that will generate a random number of letters. So we ask the user how many random letters do they want, and we need now a variable to store the Unicode that we generate inside the loop and the character that is equivalent to that Unicode. So we still need to think about the same things that we used to think before. The only difference is that we, sort of speaking, embrace those lines of code with the structure of the while loop. Okay, so the same as before, we check for the starting value of the character set that we want to generate randomly. So if we want to get an uppercase letter, we know that the first Unicode is 64, so we need to add 64 to the random value. And we know that there are 26 letters, so we put 26 in parentheses when we generate a random integer. We store the random integer in an integer variable that I name code for the letter, and then we convert that by typecasting by putting char in front. So how many random letters do you want? Four, and then it generated four random letters. It was generated one at a time. It's just that it happened in the blink of an eye because the computer works so fast. To further explain this, we modifying the code so now we also display the Unicode of the character. So you could use this concept of looping to generate the Unicode table from any value to any value. So how many random letters do you want? 10, and there is the each one of the 10 letters that were randomly generated and the Unicode that gave us that letter. And of course you can display it in any order, the letter first and the Unicode after, or vice versa, depending on your preference, as long as you do it after both the Unicode and the letter have been generated. Now I'm adding an if statement inside the loop. What is this if statement going to do? Well, I'm saying that when the value of the counter is even, I want to do a blank print line. Do you remember what that does? It sends the cursor to the next line. So if I wanted a certain number of characters per line, I can say that when the counter is multiple of a certain value, send the cursor to the next line. This didn't work very nicely because rather than comparing for um, the value to be even, I needed to check if the value was odd. And when I change that, now I see two characters per line. I could have added some space in between, like a tab, so that way everything would have been aligned, separated a little better for clarity. So you can add if statements for whatever reason that you may find it useful inside a while loop. Okay, now let's snap out of the concept of having a counter, and we learn that while loops can be used for a certain situation in which we call it sentinel value. A sentinel value is a value that when we get that value, the the loop needs to stop. So the classic example is when we roll dice. There are certain games that the person continues to roll a die until the person rolls a certain number. Normally it's done with two dice, and most games is when you roll two dice and the addition gives you seven. But for the sake of this example, I'm just rolling one die and I'm using the sentinel value 3. So I made the stopping value a variable, but I could have had that 3 in the condition, right? So while the roll of the die does not equal 3, we're going to continue to roll the die. I have a syntax error there. I have an extra conditional symbol there. So I needed to have not equal to rather than the less than symbol also. So notice that the amount of times that we roll changes. So we're going to see that what we can do also is we can add a counter to tell the person it took you 5 times to get a 3, it took you 20 times to get a 3, something like that. So why do we want to do that? Perhaps not to tell the person, ha ha ha, you roll only once, but we can do that to use that value, how many times the person won, then you can use that to calculate the chips that you need to pay the person because if it took 5 times to get a 3, it means that they won 4 times and the fifth time they lost. So you use that counter outside of the loop to calculate the winnings for the person. That way you don't calculate the winnings every single time of the roll, but you do it only once. As you become more proficient at coding, you're going to identify what you want to do inside the loop, what you want to do outside the loop. So rather than paying each time, maybe what you want to do is paying once at the end, right? So you can do that calculation at the end. So here we have a counter, but the counter is not used to stop the loop. The counter is used to tick each time that we go through to find out how many times it takes the person to get a 3, meaning how many times until they lose. So if you count, the person rolled 16 times. On the 16th, the person got a 3. Here, on the 9th time, the person got a 3. Here, it took 3 times, 4 times, 6 times. So, see, it varies because the random generator works well. It varies how many times it takes to get a 3. And you can do this with any game. So you can repeat the the jack and a pole many times. You can repeat the drawing of a card. You can repeat any of the different games that we have coded before by using a loop. And this is an input validation, the third case in which we would use a loop. So we saw before that if we use the if statement, we can tell the person, sorry, I can't do this for you. You entered the wrong value. But we know as users of computers that we don't like it when we have to start the program every time that we make a mistake. We want to be able to fix the input, right? Rather than exiting the program and starting again. Imagine if every time you made a mistake you had to restart a program. It would be very annoying. So, what we do is we use a while loop that continues to prompt while the value is incorrect. So, if the score that was entered is incorrect, we continue to prompt until the value that is entered is correct. So, we use that condition while the input is less than 0 or input is greater than 100, prompt the user, store the input. So that will continue to loop until the person realizes and enters the correct value.